Alrighty, this video is on how we created a ton of clarity around our interview process and how we actually find the right people for our company when you're doing a lot of interviews for specific positions. So for me, I'm usually the third interview. So people on my team have the first and second interview, and then finally when they get to me, I have a list of questions that I ask, which were very, well thought through, and a lot of strategy was put into these questions. But it all started with the accountability checklist that we created, which is clarifying who you really do want in your company, which is such a high value task to do. Which is going to be based on your core values and also the job functions. You can see for me, my focus is more on the core values, the ideal person segment versus the job task segment. So for me, what's really important is, as you can see, it's all, caps, must have sufficient experience. So there's a lot of times where you can fall in love with a candidate, and having these written down, in advance is very important, because even if you fall in love with the candidate, you can objectively say, well, they didn't hit criteria 1, so maybe when they get more experience in the future, they'll be a fit, but for now they're not. So you can, rather than make a gut call, you can actually have a documented accountability checklist. Now, the reason it's called an accountability checklist is someone else on your team has to hold you accountable to those standards that you've set, right? So someone else on my team will go through the accountability checklist when I feel like I want to hire someone and go, okay, well, did they have a sufficient experience? Do they have client services, Google Ads, small business experience for this role? And if I say no to those, then they're going to be like, okay, you fell in love with the candidate because we need someone. You said we need someone with X, Y, Z. So that's how the accountability checklist works. Then the questions are derived from the accountability checklist. So the ideal person, very important that we find people who are detail-oriented, high ethics, and then definitions of what each of these mean. Takes personal responsibility, especially when mistakes are made. Work ethic, cares deeply about clients, goes above and beyond, open-minded, competitive spirit, writing ability, communication style, able to form long-lasting relationships, and within our pay expectations for a position. That's another important one, is like, if you're hiring for a position, someone who meets all the criteria, but they want, $200,000 a year, they may be a great fit, but if it doesn't make financial sense for the company, you're going to do everyone else a disservice if you don't stay true to your accountability checklist. So next comes the interview questions. So we have standard, technical, brain teaser, personality, and behavioral questions. Now, the real important takeaway here is most employers, when they're interviewing either a company or an employee to work with, they give the applicant an answer before they ask the question. So what I mean by that is, the biggest mistake we were making in the past was we were saying things like, hey, we're looking for someone who's detail-oriented. Can you tell me whether you're detail-oriented, or can you explain a time where you were detail-oriented? What I've done here is I've done a good job of creating situational questions and open-ended questions that don't really lead people on. So, standard questions are more kind of like, segue questions from when they sit down. Technical questions, this is an interesting thing here. If you could just do client management or technical work, okay, which would you prefer to do 100% of the time? This allows me to know whether they're more of a technical person or a client services person. And the next one, this is a complete example, right? That tests their ability to understand, things like negative keywords and complex, strategies within Google Ads, because that's for this position. So if a client was in a car accident lawyer in New York City and they were getting calls from, people who were physically located in New York but looking for accident lawyers in Los Angeles, what changes would you make to eliminate those phone calls? And the answer is that, they would put in negative keywords for the word Los Angeles, LA, and any variation of California. But if they kind of BS their way through the answer rather than admit that they don't know the answer, that also tells me something. Brain teasers. This is a really hard one. You have a 3-gallon jug and a 5-gallon jug. How do you use these two jugs to measure out exactly 4 gallons? Very, very hard. Almost nobody gets it. Look up this one online and you'll see the answer. But it's not about whether they get the answer. It's about seeing, do they give up or do they critically think through problem-solving options? Okay, personality. I want to know who they look up to. Okay, who's your source of inspiration? What's something you're super competitive about? Okay, now what I mean by that is what's something that you think you're better than a lot of people at? Describe your ideal boss. That'll actually tell more about them than who they're looking for in the boss. What are your core values as a person? That's a great question because it puts them on the spot with a big question. And then this tests ethics, right? How would you communicate to a client in the event of a great month, mediocre month, or a terrible month? And then lastly is the behavioral stuff. Okay, so these are mostly situational and theoretical questions that are open-ended. So number one is tell me about a time you failed to meet a client expectations. Whose fault was it? Now I try and ask this off the cuff so that it doesn't seem planned. So I'll go like, tell me about it. Oh, well, tell me the truth. After they start answering, I'll be like, well, whose fault was it? Was it Bob's? And if they like give in to that and go, yeah, it really was his fault, then like that's a red flag. I want people to take responsibility for what they contributed to a situation like that. How do you react when you make a mistake? How do you react when you're angry or stressed? What's more important to you? Staying consistent and predictable by detaching yourself from the outcome, or taking ownership of your clients' accounts as if they were your own, even if it drives you crazy? Always a fun question there. Would you rather be responsible for the details or in a perfect world have someone else manage the details for you? Are you the type of person to go above and beyond for a client during a pressing deadline or come back to it the next day with a fresh mind? What is the half-life of your existing pool of knowledge? What does this mean? Well, it means how often are they upgrading their mental operating system? I don't want people who told me they haven't read a book in, 20 months, right? I want people who are like, yeah, man, I want people who are insecure with their level of knowledge, always seeking more information. So this is a great start. If you want us to send you, we have a note section here. Just email us at smbteam.com and just say, hiring packet, and we'll know what to send you. So I hope this is valuable. So many people don't know what to do to pull in the right people. But if you start with your accountability checklist and then create your interview questions to vet for these bullets backwards, you're going to be like shocked with the amount of success you'll have in your hiring decisions. Much higher than going by gut, which we did for a while. So hope that was valuable. Go to smbteam.com if you want any help with your marketing. Thanks.